Good evening, I'm David Scott.
And I'm Heather Herron. Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy will not be seen tonight so that we may present this Wayne TV Focus 15 election special.
The American political process is very important to us here at News Channel 15.
Part of that process is the open debate of issues. Tonight we bring together the candidates for the 3rd U.S. Congressional District representing voters in Northeast Indiana.
Sponsoring this debate are Wayne TV and the Mike Downs Center for Indiana Politics. Now direct from the Williams Theater on the campus of IPFW, the moderator of tonight's debate, Mark Mellinger.
Welcome to the Williams Theater on the IPFW campus. We want to thank College Access, Channel 5, and Comcast for providing the facilities and the equipment. Now the format for tonight's debate. Each candidate will have a couple minutes to respond to a series of questions, with the first candidate to respond to each question also getting a 30-second follow-up. The questions are mine. I have taken viewer suggestions into account, and the questions have been approved by Wayne TV News Management. Before we start the debate, let's introduce the two candidates. Dr. Tom Hayhurst, the Democrat, is the challenger tonight, and Congressman Mark Souder, the Republican, is the incumbent. We will start now with the opening statements, and Dr. Hayhurst will give the first one.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to give a big pat on the back to Channel 15 and to this university, IPFW, and to the Downs Center for hosting this event. I believe that this is an important part of democracy. We need to have more open discussion of issues without question. We need to give a special thanks to my wife, Judy. We met here in Fort Wayne, Indiana about 50-plus years ago, back in 3rd grade. And she's been very supportive, and I appreciate her support and my family's support, and also the support and hard work of my hundreds of volunteers during the last year and a half. I'm a medical doctor, and I'm absolutely convinced the time has come for us to make sure that all Americans have affordable health care. We need to do that through market-oriented approaches, not a massive federal bureaucracy. I'm opposed to that. Market-oriented approaches without question. I'm also a military veteran, and I think it's a travesty that the federal government has decided to shut down the inpatient beds at the regional VA hospital here in Allen County. We need to tackle that problem. I helped tackle that problem with others when I organized Veterans for Better Health Care, and we've zeroed in on our congressmen and our senators to help save the local VA. Jobs, jobs, jobs are probably the three of the most important words you'll hear from me during this campaign. We need to fight harder for better jobs for citizens of Northeast Indiana. The citizens of this area are hurting without question. I know that from talking with them on their front porches over the last year and a half. And energy independence for the United States of America is also a must. Absolutely. I'll tell you more about how we need to achieve that important goal to secure our country, to protect the security of the United States of America as our discussion proceeds. My life is about service. I've served as a physician. I've served on city council. I even went to Louisiana and served on the ground after Hurricane Katrina. I am eager to have the opportunity to serve the citizens of Northeast Indiana. Thank you very much.
Dr. Hayhurst, thank you. Now Congressman Souder will give his opening statement.
Thank you. I want to thank the Downs Center. And first let me say I'm sorry my voice is still scratchy. I was yelling a little bit too loudly at the Notre Dame game Saturday, and it recovered and has gone down, so pardon the scratchiness to my voice. It's great to be here at the Downs Center sponsoring this debate. I'm a graduate here from IPFW, and Dr. Downs was one of my favorite professors. I took him for 4 different courses, 12 credit hours from Dr. Downs. I want to thank Wayne TV for this, too. This is our 3rd full-fledged debate tonight, and we've gone back and forth a number of issues, and you'll hear us do that again tonight. My family's been in Allen County since 1846. It's been a great privilege to be here, to grow up here. My wife Diane and I have been married since 1974. I met her while I was at graduate school at Notre Dame and married shortly thereafter. This is a race not just about individuals, but different visions. And when we get into the different debates, whether it's health care, it's one thing to say it's market-driven, but the fact is you'll see his solutions are Washington-driven, and I believe in patient-centered, consumer-driven decisions. When we get into energy, I believe in a vision that does tax cuts, that does incentives, not Manhattan projects where Washington runs the program. We have a difference on border issues. We have a difference on international issues. We have a difference on abortion. We have a difference on homosexuality and the special rights for homosexuals. We have competing differences. Furthermore, we're just one individual East. We're part of a much larger party system. A vote for me is a vote for the Republican Party. A vote for Tom is a vote to put the Democrats in charge of Congress. Both of us know how to debate. He's been in City Council for 11 years. He's a good debater. I've done this too. It should be a very interesting exchange tonight.
And now we will start the questions, and Congressman Souder, you'll answer the first one first. What are one or two top initiatives, and only one or two, that the next Congress absolutely must pass to better protect our country from terrorism?
Well, it's not an either-or question. Every single year prior to 9/11, we were adding Border Patrol agents. We've gone up from 4,000 to 12,000, and securing the border is arguably the most important thing at this point. We've added Border Patrol agents every year. We added fencing every year. The bill that the President is signing will add more fences and virtual fencing. So I believe securing the border is the #1 priority, and we need to continue and expand that rate and continue to look at the Canadian border as it becomes a risk for higher terrorism. The second thing to protect our country is to make sure that we have adequate and intelligence on those who would destroy us and kill us. We can argue about health care. We can argue about energy, but if we're dead, it won't matter. And the fact is that the Democrat Party has objected to our ability to do surveillance on international phone calls. They've objected to our ability to interrogate witnesses. They've objected to our ability to pass the Patriot Act and to watch people of interest, people from countries of interest, and to track the terrorists. And the bottom line is that if you can't figure out where they are, where their money's releasing, the New York Times releasing the data of how we track finances, it's devastating to our country. Wanting to have trials where you're in open court, where you can get your witnesses compromised, anybody in court who testifies of where we got the information is going to wind up with the whole string of sources beheaded, it just doesn't work. I believe that the securing the border, securing our harbors, and making sure we have adequate intelligence here and abroad, both not only from the United States, but making sure that we get more human intelligence inside the high-risk nations around the world are the two most pressing security needs of America.
Dr. Hayhurst, your response.
Yeah, when you talk about Homeland Security, there are two major components to Homeland Security. I would say, without question, I've been involved in both of them. I served on active duty with the U.S. military when I had the opportunity, and then our national military security, our safety in that sense, is one major component. Another major component is protecting us from disasters. After a major disaster occurred in Louisiana a year ago, I personally went to Louisiana, served on the ground, helping individuals who have been flooded out by the devastating Hurricane Katrina, and I was there when Hurricane Rita came in. So I know firsthand about security for our country in more ways than one. I think that the time has come for us to implement the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission. The 9/11 Commission itself, a solid bipartisan group, Republicans and Democrats, and that's the way I think our government should head. Republicans and Democrats should work together to find solutions, not over-politicize Washington and fight with one another and not come up with solutions. I think the solution with regard to protecting our country is to implement the 9/11 recommendations. We can get into that in more detail perhaps later. Take a look at my website, tomhayhurstforcongress.com. I also think that we should, 5 years ago, have secured our borders and our ports. I believe that our government currently in power, of which my opponent was a portion, was a voter, should have taken control, secured our borders and ports 5 years ago. Not doing so, I believe, has jeopardized the safety of the citizens of the United States of America. We're way behind the loop in getting that done. Occasionally it's said there's been no serious event, such as a 9/11 event in the United States of America. Look at the timetable with regard to the Twin Towers. That is no reassurance. We've had likely bad characters come into this country during the last 5 years when our government has not secured our borders and ports. Likewise, millions more illegal immigrants have come into the country. If that had been taken care of 5 years ago, we'd have a lot less of a problem with immigrants.
And Congressman Souder, you have 30 seconds for a follow-up.
You're going to hear lots tonight about supposed bipartisan, nonpartisan solutions. The fact is 80 to 90% of what we do is bipartisan. 37 of the 41 9/11 Commission recommendations have been implemented. 4 have not. The Democrats opposed 3 of those 4. The other one was to weaken the Patriot Act. The two parties are defined by their differences, and on this issue we have big differences.
Dr. Hayhurst, you will take the next question first, and it's a twofold question. Talk about the Iraq War. Are the newly revised strategy and progress benchmarks acceptable? And how can a congressman have influence in a matter like this where the decisions come almost exclusively from the executive branch and the military?
I'd like to make a comment first regarding the prior discussion. The 9/11 Commission gave a D rating to our government, a D rating with regard to carrying out those recommendations. That's a fact. With regard to Iraq, once again, I served in the military of this country when I had the opportunity to do so, period. I'm heavily focused on the security of the United States of America. With regard to Iraq and our military involvement there, we've gotten more and more into a quagmire. It's become more and more chaotic. Even our president has described Iraq as being somewhat similar to Vietnam, our involvement there. You've heard the comments, mission accomplished. Obviously the planning was poor. We need to not just be tough. America needs to be tough, there's no question about it. We definitely need to be tough. We need to be smart. We need to not fight in a tough manner. We need to be smart with how we use our troops. I think we're at the point that we need to, with regard to Iraq and with regard to ending our involvement in Iraq, I think we need to go back to our international partners, and I believe Congress and congressional representatives can help with that specifically, rebuild those broken relationships that were broken and damaged back in 2003 and have not been repaired. I believe also that we need to go to the Iraqi people and talk with them about possibly partitioning that country. The House committees and the Senate committees involved can certainly do that. Senator John Warner says we're drifting sideways. I think we need to rebuild Iraq with Iraqi companies and Iraqi workers. House and Senate representatives, the senators and representatives in the House of Representatives can, through committee leadership, influence those decisions, and they should. They shouldn't just rubber stamp 96% of the time what the executive division of this country says. My wife doesn't agree with me that much. We need to stand up to the executive division and respect separation of powers, and Congress needs to be more active in formulating U.S. foreign policy and not be so passive.
Congressman Souder, your response.
Our primary method of influencing international foreign policy is through funding, because particularly international policy is left specifically to the Senate. So we fund the military, we fund the international aid programs. Now, we do contract with Iraqis. When people raise other companies that are American companies, they've subcontracted to Iraqis, and almost all the corruption you're reading about is because many of those firms are front firms. That we need more auditing to make sure that the money is being spent correctly by the Saudis. The Iraqis, the hospitals that weren't built by Iraqi subcontractors. So you first have to understand what the nature of the problem is before you propose solutions that actually don't even fit the problem. Now, it is a huge challenge right now, and I believe that our #1 mission, which we did accomplish, was to make sure that we destroyed their capacity to build chemical, biological, nuclear weapons. The buildings that they were adding that were going for long-range missiles were not far as long as we thought, although they were probabilities, not certainties, and that we destroyed that capability. We dismantled their scientific research programs. We accomplished that mission. What mission we haven't accomplished is to see if the people themselves will elect a democratic government, keep it there, and stop killing each other. That's something that's up to them. We went in to protect ourselves. Now that we're there, we need to give the people there who wanted freedom and democracy the chance. Because if they can be free, then we won't have to go back in. Then we won't have continued wars in that region. Then we can have bases there. But quite frankly, if they can't, and if we can't train their forces, and if they won't fight for their own freedom, we will back up again. And the President is trying to give them a reasonable timetable to train their police forces, to train their people, without doing a cut and run of exactly saying when we're going to leave. And I believe this still has a chance, but it's looking grim. It's hard. That area of the world has never had true freedom and democracy.
Dr. Hayhurst, you have 30 seconds for a follow-up.
Yeah, I'd like to make a specific point with regard to truth. The truth is, I totally agree. Don't cut and run. But we need to come up with an answer to end our involvement in Iraq, bring our troops home safely. We need to have a stable Iraq when we leave, without question. I was around and I served during the Vietnam era. I remember the last evacuee being lifted off of the embassy. We cannot have that. America must win this conflict. No cut and run.
And Congressman Souder, the next question will go to you first. I'd like each of your thoughts on the single best way for the next Congress to reduce our dependence on foreign oil and to better develop our domestic potential for energy production.
There is no single best way. The last energy bill accelerated what was already a process towards alternative energy. Basically, ethanol is now subsidized at 52 cents a gallon, 60 cents if you count some of what we've done with gasoline pumps, which is why partly you saw the explosion in the number of ethanol plants proposed in Indiana as well as the rest of the country. We also put more money in a second bill that we've passed, and we've been doing these alternative energy bills for some time, but the pace has dramatically increased. We've increased hydropower. We've increased coal to gas, which is critical. We tried to do clean coal technology. Forever Green up in Auburn is looking at how to convert waste into hydrogen energy. We've expanded wind power. We've expanded solar power. Ultimately, if you add all that alternative energy together other than ethanol and biodiesel, like over in the Claypool area, you still do not reach a threshold given increasing demand that we can fund the vehicles and the things that we make in this district. We have to drill for oil in Alaska. We need to drill for offshore oil in the Gulf of Mexico, where we've had discoveries of greater than the reserves of Saudi Arabia, it's believed, that we need to get that to market. That means you have to build pipelines. You have to do refineries. We haven't had a refinery built in this country for, I think it's 30 or maybe even 60 years. Why? The Democrats will not allow us to pass a bill that would do expedited lawsuits. In other words, all the lawsuits would have to come in a brief period of 4 to 5 years rather than extended for 40 or 50 years. They won't let us drill off the golf course. The Senate's held it up and won 60 votes to close it. We passed it in the House. That we can't pass ANWR. We passed it in the House, but the Democrats won't let it through the Senate. Now, you can say, I believe things should be bipartisan, but when you vote, you're either going to vote for a D or an R. You're either going to put the people in charge who will allow the drilling of oil and gas, so when we make pickups, when we make SUVs, when we make Hummers, when we make international trucks, we have oil and gas to do it, or you're going to vote with the party that will not allow that to occur. All of us favor ethanol.
Dr. Hayhurst, your response.
I believe strongly, as an individual that served in the U.S. military, where I was a major in the Air Force, that it is very important for the United States to declare a Declaration of American Energy Independence. We need an organized national plan. I heard my opponent mention somewhat disparagingly the Manhattan Project. If it wasn't for the Manhattan Project and a public-private relationship between our governmental leadership, the commander-in-chief in World War II, and the scientific community, the planning community, if it wasn't for that having happened, we might not be here. The Germans and the Japanese might well have had nuclear weapons. I'm talking about equally a serious national security situation right now. If our oil is cut off by the Middle East, by Russia, by Nigeria, by this character Chavez down in Venezuela, if that happens, it could devastate our economy, it could hurt us militarily and ruin our economy. Brazil is oil independent. We can also achieve the same. There's a conservation aspect. The first thing we need to do is to bring back rail. And we're already building rail over at SDI, Steel Dynamics in Whitley County. We need to do more of that. I'd love to have about 3 more huge automobile plants built in this area, making high mileage vehicles. Yeah, great. Let's have more. Let's save the Hummer factory. That's great. But let's build more plants for our manufacturing workers. We've got good workers. From the conservation viewpoint, certainly as part of an organized plan with some planning and leadership, rather than talking about a fragment of the big picture, we need to focus on biofuels, biodiesel that will help the farmers in this area, help the rural community, help all of northern Indiana. I think we also need to look seriously at coal gasification, clean coal technology. We have 600 years worth of coal, at least many hundred years worth of coal energy. We're the Saudi Arabia of coal. We need to get that coal out. That organized plan will make us more secure, and it'll also help our pocketbook so we don't have $2, $3, $4, $6 gasoline.
Congressman Souder, a follow-up.
We agree on many of the solutions. We don't agree on how to get there. I don't believe that Washington doing a massive project and taking over the energy industry and telling is the same situation as being a decision whether we're going to put 1 million men on the beaches of Japan. That it is a important decision, but you can do this through tax incentives. I believe in market-based incentives, and bottom line is if you can't drill for oil and if the other party keeps stopping us from developing our oil, we won't be making pickups here. We won't be designing international trucks, and the fact is it's the Democratic Party that has stopped that.
Dr. Hayhurst, the next question goes to you. First, share your vision for helping Northeast Indiana's job market grow and thrive. Be specific about the assist you can provide from Capitol Hill.
No, I think the three most important words, at least three of the most important words I'll say during this entire campaign, are jobs, jobs, jobs. We've got to fight harder for better jobs, more jobs for the working families in Northeast Indiana. I believe that the working people of this country are being disrespected, not giving proper respect by our national government. I'll tell you what I think we need to do. The first thing we need to do, I think, is literally change the entire culture of Washington, D.C. When I'm elected on November 7th, a bottom line measuring rod for me regarding almost every measure coming out of Congress, and frankly, policies coming out of various divisions of government, such as the Department of Labor, will be, does this measure support and help working families in Northeast Indiana and the United States of America? I believe also we need to look very hard at more of a fair trade policy than a free trade. We've opened the door wide open to ship American jobs, even encourage shipping American jobs out of this country. That's wrong. That's hurt this area. I've talked to people who are on their front porches. We've done like 50 neighborhood walks in every county in this district. People with tears in their eyes because they've lost their job and they're hurting. We need fair trade, not free trade. Fair trade shores up the environment in the other country in a trade agreement. It also helps stabilize the workforce in another country, will benefit the other country and raise up the other country and help level the playing field somewhat and help American workers. We need an organized plan. There are so many aspects of this. There are literally thousands of things that need to be done as we change the culture of Washington, D.C., executive, legislative, and the entire Washington, D.C. culture to fight for working families in the United States of America.
Congressman Souder.
Well, there he goes again. We need an organized plan. Washington needs an organized plan. What we have is competing visions. I believe decisions should be market-centered, to start with the individual, the family, the community, the state, then the federal. In economics, the biggest thing a congressman can do to help this district is do what we've done. The stock market has hit a record high. Interest rates are relatively low. Unemployment is relatively low. Inflation is relatively low. The deficit, and that's because that the president projected in 2004, he said, I'm going to try to hold down spending and balance the budget by, cut the budget in half by deficit by 2009. Last week, he announced that he cut the deficit in half in 2006, 3 years ahead of schedule. The percent of the deficit to the GDP is now below 2%. That's 1/2 of the 40-year average. Part of the reason that our economy has been able to grow is we cut the taxes on the businesses, and so that the end individuals, and gave marriage penalty incentives, and gave child credit to families. What that's done is resulted in record corporate tax revenues. The so-called tax cuts for the rich have resulted in the top 1% paying the highest percentage of taxes that they've ever paid. In other words, they didn't just pay more taxes, they're now paying the highest percent of taxes that they've ever paid. The number one job you have to have as a congressman is a vision. And then you work your district, because if interest rates are too high, your district like this will collapse. I brought $3 million in for CityLink for buses over a 5-year period. I brought $20 million in for airports in basically every single county of this region, because in this area, if you can't move around and move your executives around and move your products to market, you can't. $27 million for roads, County Road 17 and County Road 15 in Kosciuszko and Elkhart, Maple Crest Corridor, multiple roads in this district, because this district needs transportation. I brought in millions of dollars for IPFW, for St. Francis, for Tri-State, for Ivy Tech. Education is critical. You have a district focus, but the most important thing is, what is your vision, not your plan?
Dr. Hayhurst, your follow-up.
Yeah, I actually think my opponent has done a poor job with regard to looking after this district. This dates all the way back 10 years when he first ran for Congress and said he was going to run 6 terms and no more. He's now changed his mind. But 10 years ago, he did a very poor job, and the data still says the same, in supporting projects in this region. There have been a lot of dollars that have gone to various fluffy projects. When it comes to really supporting the workers of this area, I think it's very questionable.
Congressman Souder, you get the next question first. Does the long-term viability of Social Security need to be addressed by the next Congress? And if so, what is a workable, practical, passable solution that you would support?
I have to say I'm really disappointed that my opponent called the millions of dollars for the Innovation Center here at IPFW a fluffy project, or the nearly $3 million for St. Francis a fluffy project, or the $17 million for Fort Wayne International Airport, a fluffy project. That it has been tens of millions of dollars, earmarks that we've never had in this district. Social Security is a massive challenge. That the population is aging. We're now seeing it isn't just the government, it's GM, it's Ford, it's our private sector companies haven't set it aside either. And the first thing is we need to give incentives to young people to start saving, because by any means, unless we have some kind of bird flu epidemic, major war, we are looking at young people in elementary, junior high today live to be 110 years old. This system was not designed to sustain people to work 40 years and retire 40 years. Nobody in Social Security should get a reduction, and nobody about to come in should get a reduction. But we better be passing incentives so that young people can have the opportunity to cover a higher percent of those costs. We have also passed a Medicare bill for prescription drugs, which is very expensive. But now anybody at 135% of poverty gets their drugs covered, 135% below. The rest get catastrophic coverage. And most of the others get some form of aid worth about $1,700 a year. How are we going to pay for this? We need to have more incentives in the market for innovation to cut costs, just like SDI did in steel, and still keep the world's best healthcare system. Because the danger here is that if we somehow have a federal takeover and the government starts doing all the price negotiations and we go to a complete socialized medicine system with no private care, then what you're going to have is a collapse of the innovation and the new types of drugs that come to market. So I believe we have to encourage, number one, savings among young people, and we better start that immediately.
Dr. Hayhurst, your response.
Yes, with regard to Social Security, I believe it's interesting, we're talking about Social Security, and I didn't hear my opponent say he was opposed to that very liberal plan. It's interesting that you talk to individuals who say they're conservative, quote, moderates or liberals, and they all say, yeah, Social Security is great. It brought millions and millions of Americans out of poverty. It's wonderful, and we need to strengthen Social Security, not destroy it, not tamper with it in a way that would harm its great contribution to our American society. Medicare is very similar. With regard to retirement, retirement is basically built on, I'd say, a three-legged stool. Savings, we know that's very shaky in America right now. Everybody needs to save more. They need incentives to save. Retirement plans, even though the last 10 years legislation was passed, signed off on by my opponent, I am convinced retirement plans throughout the United States are very questionable. We've seen folks go bankrupt, for instance, Enron employees, many other individuals go bankrupt because of shaky lack of adequate governmental support of retirement plans. With regard to Social Security, there's several different things we can do to correct Social Security. It's a good, solid program. I want to tell young people Social Security is great. It'll be one of the foundations of your retirement. Work to correct it. Don't throw it out, and don't privatize it, especially when privatization means draining billions, hundreds of billions of dollars from Social Security to supposedly fix it. I want to make one other comment regarding political party matters. My opponent is heavily focused on political parties. He's part of the problem in Washington, D.C. He keeps talking about Democrats and Republicans. I mean, if there's a problem now, it's not due to the Democrats. We all know who runs the House, runs the Senate, and runs the executive division of this government. The Democrats in the Senate can't block anything. So we can talk a lot about political parties. I think they need to work together to bring solutions to the United States of America thank you.
Okay, yeah, you're out of time. That's why you had to stop. Congressman Souder, your follow-up.
If you're running for Congress, you ought to know how it works. It takes 60 votes in the Senate for cloture, and they can block things in the Senate, and they do. And the same thing is for rules in the House, and you ought to know that. The fact is that if you want change in Congress and you want that change to be to Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, that's the change will occur. I believe there are competing visions. I believe one of the problems in trying to tackle Social Security is just what my opponent did. He doesn't want to tell young people that their FICA taxes will be 40% with a business match if we don't fix this. We need private incentives for young people to save.
We've touched on health care a little bit already, kind of in a roundabout way. Let's stay there. Dr. Hayhurst, you get this question first. The costs continue to rise at an alarming rate. What is an appropriate and financially realistic role for the government to play in helping ensure that the average American has access to affordable health care?
I think that the government is also already heavily involved in health care. I don't think there should be any significant expansion of governmental role in health care other than just from an organizational viewpoint. there's no question in my mind, as a physician who's taking care of folks on Medicare, they have tears in their eyes, especially the last few years, trying to figure out how to keep food on the table, and pay the rent. They can't afford their blood pressure medication, for instance, because costs have gone up so high, that the time has come for affordable health care for all Americans. I also work as a volunteer at Matthew 25 Health Clinic. There's similar clinics throughout the area. There I see hard-working Americans. During the tenure of my opponent, there have been 1 million more Americans every single year without affordable health care. That's a travesty. 10,000 to 15,000 people die. I am a Christian. Why aren't the Christians, and why isn't my opponent with his talk about religion talking about being very upset that 10,000 to 15,000 Americans die every year because they do not have affordable health care? The first thing that the government needs to do, and this would just be a small office of some negotiators negotiating between private citizen and private sector. The federal government needs to say, hey, like they do for the vets right now, it's already there in principle. We want to pool together 41 million folks in Medicare, go out and negotiate the best deal for pharmaceuticals. It makes total sense. It's not a massive government program. To say that is a distortion of the truth. It's a distortion of the truth to call that a massive government program. Also, I think the time has come for the government to pool together, strictly as a negotiator, groups of 5, 10, 15 millions of workers at a time from small, medium-sized businesses like the entrepreneurial businesses in this area, and put workers in small businesses into a larger pool. We can cut health care costs by the thousands. I also feel strongly that we need to push importation of medications. My opponent voted against reimportation of medications.
Congressman Souder, your response.
Well, there he goes again. I mean, at least you get to hear the debate. He says I believe in market-based solutions. I'll touch on in a minute. He believes that a few negotiators sit down in a room. First off, I've never really met a small federal program where a few people sit down with computers and determine the prices of drugs all over America and what the private sector can do. That is a massive federal takeover of the prescription drug system if they do it. We felt a market-based system where the insurance companies competed with the private sector would drive prices down, and in fact they've driven prescription drug prices down 40 to 70% for the average senior. Now, when we get to the insurance, we've already passed association health pools in the House, and the Democrats blocked it in the Senate. I believe in risk pooling, but I believe in private risk pooling. To say that Washington is going to negotiate the insurance prices. His first proposal was Washington was going to negotiate and buy like the Veterans Administration and others. And by the way, we've got cheaper prices now. The market got the prices cheaper. But then to follow it up and say the government's going to negotiate and sit the insurance companies down and tell them what they can charge. If you believe in markets, you believe that competition gets prices down, not people sitting in a room in Washington with computers hauling in the private sector companies and telling them what to do. I believe that a patient-driven, individual-driven, consumer choice system is what works best. I believe that we need to have Medicaid and community health centers for the poorest among us. Then you go to having deductibility with refundable on your insurance. If we can't get a credit, then we should go to individual deductibility so you can move your insurance with you and not be tied to your employer. I believe we need state and local innovation. We need to encourage states like Massachusetts did in their program, but not a national program. Encourage states to experiment, like Muskegon, Michigan, where they're allowing a local experimentation. It's the private sector and experimentation that will get prices down and keep quality up, not people in a room in Washington.
Dr. Hayhurst, your follow-up.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting at all that the government determine the price. I'm suggesting that the government assist 41 million individuals on Medicare to get the best deal, highest quality, lowest cost. Just be a negotiator. The best price, period. Highest quality, lowest cost. That's what we need to do. Part D of Medicare, by the way, I believe is rationing by inconvenience. I've seen that as a physician. Rationing by inconvenience is so complex with a donut hole, many individuals are discouraged from even participating.
Congressman Souder, the next question goes to you first. Would you be willing to pledge not to vote for federal income tax hikes for the next 2 years? Why or why not?
I not only won't increase federal income tax, I want to make the tax cuts we have permanent. I believe, as I stated earlier, that if you believe in a private sector economy, you basically believe that individuals and businesses can make better decisions than Washington can. And that, in fact, if you have the economy growing at the rate it's growing, the growth rate and the productivity rate and the inflation rate allows you to expand at a reasonable rate your federal expenditures as long as they aren't increasing at a faster rate than the revenues coming in and the growth in the economy. So I believe, as a supply-side Reagan tax cutter, that we've again proven that when you cut taxes, income rises. Now let me give the example of capital gains. It's the difference between what they call static scoring and dynamic scoring. In static scoring, you say they projected that if you sold your house, that you would get a revenue increase the first year, and then it would go down the next few years because, of course, you'd never sell your house again. Well, what happened when we cut capital gains taxes, people sold their house once. Then they sold it again. And the person they sold it to then may have decided to get a bigger house, and they moved more. We have had a soaring of capital gains revenue, which was already a double taxation. A small business might have sold their business once, but then they go up another time. The fundamental question is, who makes investment in America? How do we get the economy to grow? We can't labor compete with China. I'm on multiple bills. My opponent was for NAFTA. I was against NAFTA. I voted against MFN. I'm on multiple bills with Chinese cars shouldn't come in here without a tariff until they change theirs. They shouldn't get their cars into our market. But at the same time, ultimately, either you believe you can have capitalism work in this country and have market-based and let people make the decisions, or you have government doing it. And if you take the revenue from the people, if you take it from the productive classes of America, what you will have is stagnation and many more jobs fleeing our nation.
Dr. Hayhurst, your response.
Yeah, I'll take a pledge not to vote for any increase in taxation over the next 2 years after I'm elected on November 7th. I think that I agree with the concept that tax cuts generally do stimulate the economy. I might mention, taxes are often spoken of by individuals such as my opponent as being evil. Taxes won World War II. Taxes built the entire interstate highway system under the guidance of a gentleman for whom I have great respect, Dwight D. Eisenhower. So they're very important things that taxes do. Taxes educate our kids. Admittedly, we're talking about state taxes, not federal taxes. So not all taxes are evil, even though it's very easy, very convenient for a politician to talk against taxes continually. I think we have enough taxation in the United States of America right now. I think the taxation system has been shifted more and more from being a tax system which taxes those who have more wealth at a higher rate to becoming very flat tax. The Social Security tax itself, think what percentage of taxes are paid on Social Security by a couple that makes $100,000 a year as opposed to Bill Gates. Bill Gates is like 0.001%. There is a regressive tax that hurts people in lower income brackets without question. So I'll take that pledge absolutely. I think we need to hold down taxes. We need to free up dollars for citizens to buy goods, buy a home, buy groceries, buy a new car, and help buy a new truck, help our local GM plant. Thank you.
Congressman Souder, your response.
Well, first off, I'm not going to spend my time defending taxes. I've met very few people who feel that they're undertaxed. Secondly, we just have to get this straight. I know I'm being repetitive. When you vote for change, you're voting for a party. If you've changed Congress, Charles Rangel's going to head the Ways and Means Committee. He's already said he's going to raise every single one of the tax cuts that we've done. You don't get to vote on that as a member. That's already been decided. If the Democrats win control, Charlie Rangel's head of Ways and Means, and he's promised all the tax cuts will be raised, and you'll have at least 5 major tax increases.
We move on to the next question, and Dr. Hayhurst, it goes to you first.
All right.
You both say you would like to see the number of abortions in our country reduced, but you do have differences on this issue. Explain your stances when it comes to abortion-related law and taxpayer funding of abortions.
Sure. I'm very glad you asked that question because I want to make it clear. I think abortions are a huge problem in this country. We need to work actively to reduce abortion. My opponent has been running ads saying I'm, quote, pro-abortion. Total distortion of the truth. Total distortion of the truth. I think we need to work actively to reduce abortion. I think it's a major problem in the country. I'm a physician. I've spent my whole life focusing on enhancing life, protecting life. I've been up at 3 a.m. in the morning with a nurse at a patient's bedside when no one else is around, saving lives. My whole life has been dedicated to protecting, enhancing, saving lives. I think in exactly those terms. I think that same way with regard to abortion. I think we need to. I would never sign off, for instance, on an amendment to the Constitution or a federal law that makes abortion illegal. But I believe we need to work actively to reduce abortion in the United States of America. I do not support abortion. Once again, just to strongly emphasize that. I think there are a couple things that we need to do. First thing we need to do is through public-private relationships work, great. I think we need to work hard to convince women, and men are often involved in this decision, obviously, to not to have abortions, to carry children to term, to put them up for adoption, or perhaps not to become pregnant in the first place, where they feel they're unable to take care of a child. The other thing we need to do is to strengthen the social safety net when it comes to education, jobs, when it comes to education for a child, food on the table, a roof over the child's head. I'm sure there are many mothers who are very religious, and I believe in God, who sat down on their knees praying about whether to have an abortion or not, realizing the social safety net has been so damaged and so fragmented, they're going to bring a child in the United States of America, child into their home with no food, poor education. That's wrong. We need to work on the social safety net. Then there will be fewer abortions.
Congressman Souder.
I'm so thankful for so many people in this district, with the Hope Center, with Women's Care Center, who've reached out to young mothers who are worried about these challenges of how they're going to feed and care for their children. It's very important that all Christians, all non-Christians, people of all faiths and backgrounds reach out to people when they're hurting. But it's a human life. And it isn't a question of, I don't have a big enough house, and we have no way to protect this except for a human life amendment. My opponent just said he is opposed to it. He answered the question, abortion should always be legal. That means you're pro-abortion. It's real simple. If abortion should always be legal, it doesn't mean you want millions more of them and you wouldn't like to discourage it. I agree with that, but it means you're pro-abortion. That's the definition of pro-abortion. I think that from the time you have your separate makeup, those most innocent little babies need to have the protection of human life. It's inconceivable to me that in a country like ours, that we would destroy the most innocent among us. And I don't hear, he just said he's not pro-abortion. I don't hear the passion for the individual, little innocent people. I've worked in my committee to protect their life. Ultimately, it's a question of life. Do you believe it is a human life or not? And if you believe it's a human life, it should have the full protection of the law. He didn't answer the question about public funding of abortions, whether those of us who believe that it's killing should be forced to fund this in government hospitals for low-income people. I am opposed to that. I am opposed to the federal policy funding those abortions internationally. The Democratic Party won't even allow us to have those amendments if they take control. If you believe in human life, this is a stark difference on abortion, a clear difference. I'm not arguing, nor is anybody arguing. He's out there running an abortion clinic. The question is, do you believe people should be allowed to kill innocent little babies?
Dr. Hayhurst, your follow-up.
No, I do not support public funding of abortions. I will add that. You know, it's very interesting. My opponent, who always describes himself as a conservative, in this situation totally abandoned his own conservative position. He wants the government to mess around with personal decisions by women who are pregnant. He wants the government, apparently, to pass a law that says, no, you cannot have an abortion. What that'll mean would be women would bring children into this country, bear a child, have a birth, young child, without a proper safety net.
Congressman Souder, you get the next question first. You have both said you're professing Christians, and I would like you to explain how that shapes your views on issues. Do you regard the Bible as the infallible Word of God, the final authority for every decision in life?
I appreciate, excuse me, once again, I apologize for my voice. I appreciate the opportunity because I know this can be controversial, but I believe that you have a vision of the world that's either a one world vision or another. When I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Savior when I was 17, I believe it then meant the rest of my life had to be guided by that. I believe the Bible is the infallible Word of God. I believe it is given us and divinely inspired, and it should be our guideline. Now, the Bible is a lot more clear when it says babies are fearfully, wonderfully made, when it talks about John the Baptist leaping in the womb for joy when he heard the announcement that Christ was in Mary's womb. That suggests abortion is a pretty serious government matter. But you know what? The Bible isn't real clear on a lot of things that we deal with. It's not absolutely clear whether we should go to coal gasification or drill for oil in the Gulf of Mexico. You look at what's the best use of the resources he gave us, what's the best way to do this, what's the most efficient, and there is a hierarchy of how you apply your faith to public life. I have been very open about my faith, not to brag about it, because I stumble. I sin, I struggle just like every other Christian does, and everybody from other faiths do. At the same time, you have a right to know what my world vision is, and that I believe the Bible is the infallible Word of God, and at times that may put me at odds with what some people believe in this district. It's why I am so aggressively pro-Israel. I know this district doesn't like international aid. I know they've had some concerns about that, but I believe we have a moral obligation to stand with Israel. Not only are they a democratic country, but we need to stand there. It does have an impact on my belief in life. It does have an impact on how I approach prostitution, how I approach internet gambling, how I approach homosexual marriage. Yes, my worldview is shaped. The question is, are you a strong enough person to admit what your worldview is, or do you hide behind it and say, no, I don't have a worldview?
Dr. Hayhurst, your response.
Yeah, I do believe the Bible is the infallible Word of God. And Bible, my faith, has literally driven my decision to run for U.S. Congress, because I think this country is on the wrong track in many different ways. If you talk about religion, why isn't my opponent talking frequently about the fact that 10 to 15,000 individuals die in this country every year for lack of affordable health care? I mean, why don't we hear more about that from the biblical point of view? I think that's terrible. It fits with nothing I've ever read in the Bible. With regard to religion, I've also focused on service. My life has been about service. I'm a medical doc. I went into medical school because of service, as did 80% of physicians in the 1960s, 4 years ago when I went to medical school, for public service, to serve the community and serve our patients. I've served on city council. I've served as a volunteer at Matthew 25. All this is part of my own faith and the way an individual should live his life. I also served, as I mentioned, as a volunteer in Louisiana when people were thrown out of their homes and devastated. So service is an important part of my religion, and I've lived it throughout my entire life. Trust and truth is another part of religion. When I make a comment, make a statement, I stick by it. I'm a man of honor. I'm my own man. I don't care what Nancy Pelosi says, by the way. I'm my own man. I'm going to be my own man in Congress. And when I make a promise, I'll stick by it. And we all know that that truth is an important biblical premise. My opponent stated 12 years ago that he would not run for more than 6 terms. He has abandoned his own promise to the people. A promise to the people is even a higher level, to the citizens, the voters, is a higher level promise than a promise to your next door neighbor. I mean, everybody occasionally has to break a promise. That's a sad situation. But this was a promise to hundreds of thousands of people that was broken.
Congressman Souder, your follow-up.
People often ask me, what's the most disappointing thing about this job? It's when people openly say mistruths and try to put words in your own mouth. I campaigned on 12-year term limits. I voted for 12-year term limits. I'm tired of my opponent saying I lied. I'm tired of him saying and attacking my religion during Vietnam. I was never drafted. How many times have you read in this community? How many phone calls have people got in this community smearing me on my character like you just heard? One side of a Christian is you don't lie about another person. We argue issues here, but the character attack that he just made was disgusting.
Dr. Hayhurst, the next question comes to you first. How should we address the problem of the 12 million illegal immigrants in our country right now in a way that is both practical and upholds the rule of law?
I have a 3-part plan to tackle that particular problem, and I want to emphasize I have a plan. My opponent says, yes, it's a problem. He has a portion of a plan, but then just tells us what we can't do. So I've at least had the guts and the gumption to come up with a plan. Here's my plan. The first thing we need to do is to secure our borders and secure our ports. That should have been done 5 years ago. During the watch of my opponent and his colleagues, our borders have been like a sieve. Our ports have been like a sieve. We almost turned over our port control of multiple ports to a company which laundered money for the 9/11 terrorists and the UAE ran terrorists through that country that blew up the World Trade Center. I think that's a disgrace. That problem should have been solved 5 years ago. If it had been solved appropriately 5 years ago, securing our borders and ports, we've had millions fewer illegal immigrants right now. I think we need an organized plan. I have the guts to offer a plan. I'm against amnesty. That equals signing off on a document of pardon. Absolutely not. That was done back in the Reagan administration. Didn't work. I'm against amnesty. I think we need to tell all the 12 million individuals. I think, first of all, I think we need to widen the pathway for legal, L-E-G-A-L, legal immigration into the United States of America. This is the melting pot. The United States is the hope of the world. If the United States, period, the United States is the hope for the future of the world, we must have a stable United States. We need to open up legal immigration further. I think we need to tell the 12 million people here, look, we're going to let you come forward one by one and apply to go through an immigration process. You're going to have to pay for it, so the American taxpayer doesn't have to pay for it. If you can send $25 billion to Mexico, you can put hundreds of dollars per person into this process. You're going to have to know, it's going to take many years. You're going to have to know who George Washington was. You're going to have to know the English language. You're going to have to know the Constitution. If you want to do that, okay, we'll let you apply. If you don't, you leave.
Congressman Souder, your response.
This is our fourth time that we've debated, and I have to respect my opponent for having a plan. He favors amnesty. Now, he stands up and says, I don't favor amnesty. His website says he's for amnesty. His Vote Smart thing says he's for amnesty, because this is what amnesty is. There isn't any fair-minded person who separates it. If you believe somebody who's entered the United States illegally, then took a job with a fake ID or no ID, then didn't or paid taxes under a fake ID, then drove a car under a fake ID, didn't insure themselves, they are never eligible for citizenship. He says he wants them to put through what everybody else would go through. By definition, they can't. That's what amnesty is. If you forgive all that law breaking, which if you're waiting for Macedonia to come in, if you're waiting from Turkey to come in, if you're waiting from Guatemala to come in, you have to wait in line and go through our office, and we try to help you get in. But you can't get in if you've broken American laws. That's why it's called amnesty. Now, the next part of this is that in trying to deal with this, if you make them citizens as opposed to work permits, then it's chain migration. You can bring in your spouse. You can bring in your children. You get to bring in your mom and dad, your spouse's mom and dad. After 5 years, you get to bring in your brothers and sisters and do that. That's why the Senate bill would bring 80 million people in. And if you have a path to citizenship and don't disqualify people who've come in and broken the laws, then it is amnesty. Now, I believe that we need to have the borders first. What I've seen in multiple hearings is they'll come right back in. If you deport them at the workplace, they come right back in multiple states, DUIs in 3 states after have been deported multiple times. We need biometric indicators on their licenses. As we get that and as we strengthen our border, which takes a long time because it costs millions of dollars, it's not like we haven't been working at it, and it's not like Nancy Pelosi didn't oppose every step of the way, that as we get the border more secure, then we have to look at what are we going to do with the people here. And I believe work permits may be part of that solution, but certainly not amnesty in the form of citizenship.
Dr. Hayhurst, your follow-up.
Yeah, I think we should have followed the 9/11 commissions, secured our borders 5 years ago. That would have made our country much more secure. My opponent always talks about security. It didn't get done. It should have been done. That would have been a great preventative measure to keep us from being in this fix we're in. I'm a firm believer. No amnesty. But we have to have a solution. I at least have the guts to come up with a plan, not just to politicize this matter.
Thank you, gentlemen. That does it for the questions. We still have the closing statements to get to, and we'll do that in a moment. Welcome back to tonight's debate. It's time for the closing statements, and Dr. Hayhurst, you have the honors.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this great debate. I think it's part of our democratic heritage. I think we need to have a lot more debates of this type, and thanks once again to Channel 15, IPFW, and the Down Center for this opportunity. I'm very lucky to have grown up in northern Indiana. I've traveled here and there in my medical training. I always say I had a lot of ideas about where to go. My wife wanted to come back to northern Indiana, so we compromised, and this is where we came. And I always say thanks to her. It was a great place to grow up and raise kids. I am a medical doc. There's no question in my mind the time has come for us to make sure all Americans have affordable health care. It is unreligious, sacrilegious, in any way you look at it, for there to be 1 million more individuals every year without health care, and for 10,000 to 15,000 U.S. citizens that die every year because they don't have affordable health care. Affordable health care for all Americans, not through massive government programs, but through market-oriented approaches. That's what I believe. With regard to our veterans, I think it's wrong that on my opponent's watch, the VA decided to shut down inpatient beds at the VA hospital, throwing out of that hospital vets who are indigent, don't have enough money to buy health insurance, and veterans as well who are service-connected. It's a travesty. I helped start a group called Veterans for Better Health Care, along with others who've been fighting to keep the VA open. We're making slow progress, but we're going to get it done after I'm elected to Congress. I also believe firmly that we need a declaration of American energy independence for our security especially, but also for our pocketbooks. And jobs, jobs, jobs are 3 of the most important words I'll say during this entire campaign. I promise you that when I'm elected, when I make a promise, and I've told you what I'm going to work on, when I make a promise, I'll stick with that promise. That's a basic Christian belief and a Christian attitude. I'll stick with that promise. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Appreciate if you get out and vote. Be sure to do that. If you want to change Washington, change who you send to Washington. Thank you.
Congressman Souder, your closing statement.
Thank you very much. It's been a privilege to serve the people of Northeast Indiana for the last 12 years. It's an awesome privilege. Growing up in a small town of Grable, I thought it would be lucky if I ever met a staffer to a county commissioner, let alone be a United States congressman. I fought hard for this district. I appreciate my wife, Diane, for standing by me and my kids as they've had to open the paper in the morning, watch all kinds of lies printed about you. People don't even know you, saying things that you supposedly said. Phone calls going into people's homes, attacking your integrity. It is hard, and I appreciate my family's willingness to stand with me and go through this. But it's also been rewarding. As people come up, I've had veterans from all over this district. They knew this hospital was going to be closed. We fought hard, and it looks like we've saved inpatient care. It looked like we were going to lose our air base, and we fought hard to save our air base. When people came up and said our families are dying of meth here, I led the fight in Washington. There is not a soul in the United States in narcotics. I've had the endorsements of all the narcotics organizations all over America who are concerned about this race, and I wrote the Combat Meth Act and passed it through Congress. As you tackle issues like that, it's been a privilege to do that. But ultimately, when you say, do you want to change Congress, this isn't about our egos here. This is about what direction is America going to go. Do you want to change back to the way Congress was run, or do you want to have a Republican-led Congress? Yes, we have problems, but the fact is, I believe the private sector works best for the economy, lower taxes, economic growth. I believe it's important to have family and moral values in this country and that we respect the right to life and traditional marriage. I believe it's important that we use market-based solutions to health care and energy, and we address those questions aggressively. I believe that if all else, whatever else you do, if we're not safe, if we don't have the ability to track, hunt down, and find the terrorists, we're all going to die. And I believe these are 2 completely different visions between a Nancy Pelosi Congress and a Republican Congress, and I hope you'll go out there and vote Republican and vote for me.
Gentlemen, thank you both for a good, lively debate this evening, and that wraps up tonight's debate, rather. Thank you for joining us. If you missed any of this debate, you can log on to our website, WANE.com, and see it in its entirety under the featured videos section. I'm Mark Mellinger. Have a good night.